characteristics of complex trauma. And today we come to the fact that people with complex trauma end up having many insecurities. They're very insecure about a lot of different things. So let me begin with the definition of what I mean when I talk about an insecurity. So an insecurity is a feeling of inadequacy or not being good enough to handle something. So it's a feeling of inadequacy and uncertainty. It produces anxiety within the person about one's goals, about relationships, about ability to handle situations. So when you look at insecurity, I think it's helpful to realize that we have external insecurity and internal insecurity. So a child, in order to develop a secure sense about life and themselves, need to grow up in an environment that is externally secure. They know where their next food is coming from. They're feeling safe, so their exterior environment is secure, but they also need an internal environment to be secure. And the problem with complex trauma is it creates an insecure external environment, which then creates an internal environment that is full of insecurity as well. So if you look at your external environment today, it could be, do I have enough money in the bank? Will I still have a job? Will I get COVID? Will there be a war? Lots of insecurities in an external world, but I want to focus mainly on internal insecurities that you may have. So those would be defined as something about yourself that you don't feel good about. Some characteristic about your body, some characteristic about your personality that you don't feel good about, and you're afraid that others will think less of you because of it, or that they will reject you because of it, or they won't accept you into their peer group or become your friend because of that characteristic. And so that characteristic causes you a feeling of anxiety or insecurity. So I want to get you to think about some causes, and we're going to end up at complex trauma, but I want to lead into it. So many people, or pretty well everybody in our culture, has a subconscious standard of perfection, or a standard of what a person has to do to be respected, to belong to a peer group. And so that standard, when you start to look at it, even though it's subconscious, it includes what kind of body do I have to have? What about my weight? How pretty do I have to be? How smart do I have to be? What kind of personality is most popular? What kind of clothes do I have to wear? What kind of talent and ability do I need? What kind of job? What kind of money? All of those, you might have a standard that you weren't even aware of. And if you fall short of that standard, then you feel anxiety. I'm not good enough in this area. I'm not good enough in this area. And that becomes an insecurity. And you feel that everybody in the world is operating by the same standard. So you feel that everybody's going to judge you, reject you, if you don't measure up to that standard in your life. So that's the first thing. The second thing, and it's tied into it, is this. You look at people in your world who seem to meet the standard. Sometimes you look at people who are the most popular. And what you usually find out is they seem to meet the standard better than others. So they're prettier, they're outgoing, they're funny. They are just this very warm type of person. And so you go, see, that shows The standard is the basis for acceptance. The standard is the basis for having value. And so you compare yourself not just to the standard, but to the popular people in your world. And if you don't measure up to them, it creates anxiety. And you have insecurity in the areas where you don't measure up to the popular people. So those are two things that happen in pretty well everybody, basically at a subconscious level. Now let me give you this definition, this statement. Everybody deals with insecurity from time to time. It can appear in all areas of life and come from a variety of causes. It might stem from a traumatic event, and we're going to get to that, patterns of previous experience, the popular people, how they were treated, social conditioning, that unspoken standard, learning rules by observing others, or local environments such as school, work, and home. So that kind of summarizes what we've been saying. So it's important to understand up front that every person, whether they grew up in a healthy home or an unhealthy home, will experience some insecurities at some time in their life. That's just part of life. But what I want you to understand is people from complex trauma experience tons more insecurity. And beyond that, I want you to understand is a child from a healthy home, when they feel an insecurity, their parents will help them process through that insecurity so it doesn't become a debilitating issue in their life. But children from complex trauma, they have lots more insecurities, but then they don't get help to process through those insecurities. So those insecurities, they respond to in ways that make things worse. And those insecurities become debilitating. Basically, they become like a prison to them. And many of you relate to that. And so again, complex trauma, more insecurities than a child from a healthy home, respond differently than a child from a healthy home, and respond in ways that actually make things worse. So let me give you an example. Let's say that you've been asked to tell your story, or you are going to start a new job. You've not done either of them before, and so you have a certain amount of nervousness, a certain amount of self-consciousness and worry. You have insecurities, okay? Everybody, whether from healthy or unhealthy, who's asked to share their story for their first time or start a new job is going to go through some of that. And so the night before, or the 2 nights before, you might have difficulty sleeping because your brain is wondering about this new thing and is a bit anxious about it. Okay, so that's normal. So what would a healthy child do with that? They would get tools. You know, everybody's nervous. You just sit in it. Don't run. Don't do anything crazy. This is all part of what is normal. Push through it. You have the ability. They'd validate them, encourage them, and a child would go and do that. And then they would come back and their parents might, or friends might say, you did a good job. Or they might say, you know what? You have a lot of ability in this area. And then over time, they might be told, here's what you could do to improve and become even better at it. And a child would be open to all of that. So they would be insecure for a bit, but would sit in it, push through it, go through the experience, and become stronger because of it. Now bring in complex trauma, unhealthy response to telling your story for the first time or starting a job. You would obsess for days. You wouldn't be able to sleep. Your anxiety would go through the roof. It would trigger your stress response in a way that would put you back on your foot. You would be in survival mode. And so you might try to back out. You might try to come up with excuses why you can't do it. You might eventually go through it, but then afterwards you beat yourself up. Or as you're preparing for it, you're expecting yourself to do it perfectly. And so after you do it, if you find one mistake that you didn't do perfectly, you get down on yourself and it becomes a negative experience. And for many, they go, I'm never going to do that again. I'm out of here. So the complex trauma child, this situation has actually resulted in greater fear, greater shame, greater anxiety, greater insecurity. It has become a more negative thing in their life. So let me bring in the complex trauma and really explain. Complex trauma contributes to insecurity in many, many ways. So it's not just from one thing within your home or school. It can be from many different things. So let me break those down for you. So the first one is attachment. And we talk about this a lot, but let me give you a context for it. What is the opposite of insecurity? It's security. It's feeling safe, being able to relax, being okay with how things are, okay? So a little child comes into the world. They don't have the tools to handle the problems of the world, so they would naturally not feel safe. They would naturally not feel secure. So what does a child need in order to feel secure? They need one or two big people in their life that they can connect to, attach to, who are going to be their rock. Then they will feel security. And so they need a secure person that they can attach to. But that secure person needs certain characteristics. They need to be safe. They need to be able to meet the child's needs. They need to want to attach to that child, which means accepting them, loving them unconditionally, consistently being there for them. And that child needs to feel totally loved and accepted. If a child feels that, then they can attach to this consistent rock and they feel secure. But if they can't attach, then they feel all alone facing a big bad world. And it creates tons of feelings of insecurity. Let me take it further. Because other dynamics happen when a child tries to attach to that parent who they want to be their rock, but they can't. So internally, the child feels, well, it must be my fault. There must be something wrong with me as to why my mom or my dad doesn't want to connect with me in this area of fear. And so in their brain, it is trying to solve what is wrong with me that makes my parent not want to connect with me. So they replay all their experiences with their parent and they go, it must be because I cry too much. It must be that I get angry once in a while. It must be that I'm boring. It must be that I'm ugly. And so now they look at that characteristic as being the reason why their parent doesn't want to connect with them, and they hate that about themselves. I'm too emotional, I'm too sensitive, I'm too shy, I'm too ugly. Now, based on that, they're pretty sure that because of those characteristics, friends at school won't want to connect with them either. So those characteristics now must be hidden. Those characteristics are weaknesses that prevent people from wanting to connect with them. And so then they go, okay, what characteristics do I need to have in order to have other friends want to connect with me? Well, let's look at other kids at school. Who are the most popular? Who does everybody want to connect with? It's the pretty one. It's the smart one. It's the one great in sport. And they go, okay, that's what I need to try and have or become. But if they can't become pretty, if they can't become good at sports, then they have this great big insecurity. And so if somebody comments on their lack of beauty, if someone comments on their shyness or their sensitivity, that just exposes them. And it produces tremendous shame. And so that lack of connection has ramifications in a child's life that causes them to start to hate parts of themselves and have great insecurity around those characteristics. Okay, the second thing that happens in complex trauma. Many complex trauma families have these characteristics where they try to be funny by picking on others. That's one of their ways of humor in the family. And so they tease others. They make fun of them. They talk about their big ears. They talk about them being chubby. They talk about all kinds of different things. They might even give them a hurtful nickname. Or bullies at school or sibling bullies at home, they find a characteristic about another child and they make fun of it. They laugh about it. They talk about it, broadcast it to others. And they take shots all the time at that. Okay, so whatever characteristics you had that you were teased about, made fun of, got a nickname at, you were made to not feel good enough in that area, that will probably be an area of insecurity for you today. The more pain you felt as a child when you were teased about something is the greater the feeling of insecurity about that area it will be today. Another thing that happens in complex trauma families is you get punished for certain characteristics. You get punished because you are too outspoken, because you cry too much, because you aren't the life of a party, you're shy, and you get forced to be out front and punished afterwards. So you get punished for all kinds of different things. That then becomes something that you see as bad about yourself that is now an insecurity. Another thing that happens is parents, often in complex trauma families, aren't very validating to their children, but they're very critical of their children. You're not good enough in this area. You can't do this right. You can't do this right. And it's criticism after criticism with little validation. That produces lots of insecurity. Then tied to the attachment is if you don't feel like you belong to your family, you just don't seem to fit in, you feel like a black sheep, then you will have insecurities. If you are abandoned, you will have lots of insecurities because you're pretty certain there's a whole lot about you that must be bad for parents to abandon you. Then, if you got your sense of value from the wrong things, so if your mom was always preoccupied with her body, with being pretty, with putting her makeup on right, her having the stylish clothes, the fancy haircut, but you're not naturally super pretty, then because mom put so much emphasis on that, you're going to have a sense of insecurity about your looks. And for some, just not fitting into the main peer groups at school. Then if you had major failures in your life, you'll probably have insecurities about those failures. So what you can see there is 12 different things that characterize complex trauma families that contribute to insecurity. Now I want to get real specific here. And this you can do as a test for yourself. So I want to go through basically the two areas of internal insecurity. So it's about my physical characteristics and it's about my personality characteristics. Both of those are things I really can't change about myself. And so I'm going to give you some of the stuff that I've seen over the years as a counselor that people have insecurity about, and you can kind of evaluate yourself. So a child from complex trauma will have many of these appearance insecurities. So number one would be their weight. So like there's a magical weight that everybody needs to attain if they are going to be okay. And so there's a lot of pressure put on them regarding their weight issues. That can create an insecurity. And if you gain a pound or two, that just ups the insecurity. Your skin, the color of your skin, freckles or moles, having acne, all of those things can be types of insecurities for people. Your teeth, too crooked, buck teeth, those kind of things, great insecurities for people. Your ears stick out too much, too big, great insecurity. Your nose, too big, too much like a ski slope, on and on, insecurities about your nose. Your hair, the color of your hair, whether it's too straight or too curly, all of those things people can have insecurities about. Then with your hair, too much body hair, going bald, insecurity. Then lips even, lips too fat, too thin, etc. Your eyes, don't like the color of your eyes, fact that you have to wear glasses. Your chin, many people have insecurities about their chin. Your musculature, how muscular you are. The broadness of your shoulders, your height, too tall, too short. Big boned, don't like that. Where fat gets stored on your body. And then you go into the sexual stuff. The bigness of your butt, the bigness of your breast, the size of your genitals. All of those things, people think there's a magical standard of what perfect is, and if they fall short, they have an insecurity. And so if you look at our culture today, there's just tons of insecurities that people have around those things, and it's a very sad thing. Let me go to the personality piece. And complex trauma probably affects this just as much as even greater than the physical appearance. So many people from complex trauma hate the fact that they're an introvert, that they were a shy kid. They somehow think that extroversion is better than introversion. Introversion is a weakness, something wrong with you. And so they have a lot of insecurity about their introverted personality. Some just hated the fact that they were so sensitive and they have insecurities around that. Or that they were just too serious. They weren't funny. They weren't that kind of humorous person. Or they were kind of a scatterbrained person, a bit ditzy maybe. And they got picked on and made fun of for that. Or that they weren't quick with a joke, quick to catch on. And they have a lot of insecurity about that. Some just feel their personality is very boring. And they don't hate that about themselves. Some don't like the fact that they're so analytical. They're always thinking and processing and wondering why about stuff. They hate that. Some don't like the fact that they're so academic. They love that nerdy, geeky stuff that gets them made fun of. Some don't like that they were a tomboy. They got made fun of for that. Or that their anger, or they cried too much, or they found it hard to speak in public, or they didn't make friends easily. How did you do on those two areas? Because I suspect that for many of you, you would have checked off almost every single one of those things that I mentioned as something that was an insecurity, that is something that causes you anxiety when you're with other people. Well, let me give you a third type of insecurity, and it's takes it in a little different direction, but I think you'll understand it. And people from complex trauma struggle with it a lot. And it's your performance. And so when you feel you've never been good enough, and when you've always been held to an unrealistic standard of perfection, now when you go into the work world, when you're in relationships, you're going to constantly struggle with your performance and have insecurity about it. So it could be your job, your school, your volunteer responsibilities, even your cooking or your driving, or how you do chores around the house, or how you perform sexually. So here's what would happen if you have an insecurity there. You could be doing the same job for months, you could be married for years, but in your mind, you're pretty sure they still are talking behind your back about that you're not good enough. Even though they've given you verbal affirmation and praised you, you still have an insecurity that they're probably criticizing you behind your back. And so what they say to your face isn't what they mean, is kind of where your brain goes. And so because of that, even after doing something for years, it still is stressful when you have to perform it. Because you've never been able to resolve that you don't feel good enough. And so performance now becomes affected, and I have lots of insecurities about that because of all the internal insecurity I have about myself. Then that goes beyond just performance. Job-wise, service-wise, it affects relationships negatively. So if you have tons of insecurities, you probably wonder regularly if your partner still finds you attractive, if they're still satisfied with you. You still wonder, am I wanted by them? Am I desirable? Would they still want me if I gained weight, or if I had cancer, or if I became disfigured in a car accident? All of those things are torturous insecurities because you still think the other person knows you don't meet the standard and at some level are not satisfied with you because you're not satisfied with yourself. And so that puts stress on a relationship. And then if your partner builds some other friendships outside the home and gets involved in other activities and programs, you feel insecure. Maybe they're pulling away from me. Maybe they're going to find somebody better than me. And now you will have jealousy that kicks in because of your insecurity, and it will cause extra conflict. So those internal insecurities begin to have a ripple effect into all of life. That's what I want you to see. And in a negative way. And it creates extra stress for you internally, and it feeds into more shame and more anxiety. So what are some of the unhealthy ways people respond when their insecurities are triggered? The first thing that some people do as soon as their insecurity is triggered is, I'm out of here. I'm going to avoid that person from now on. I'm going to avoid that group. I'm going to isolate. And sometimes when you're with somebody and they're triggered, you automatically see they can no longer look you in the eye. They look down, and it's like they want to get small. They want to become invisible. They want to get out of there. That's that avoid, isolate that kicks in as soon as insecurities are triggered. Then that person begins to beat themselves up with their thoughts. You're a loser. You can't do anything right. You've blown it again. Some resort to self-harm. Others mentally obsessed. They start to play that scene over and over and over. Oh, I wish I said this. Oh, I wish I did that. And they can't sleep at night because they're replaying all of that. And it's all just because of insecurities. Then others with lots of insecurities, they seek constant validation. They're constantly, was that good enough? How did I do? How did I do? Now, We all need validation to a degree. But people with lots of insecurities, they can overdo it to the point that they end up creating the opposite of what they want. They want more validation, and what happens? People get tired of them asking, how'd I do, that they stop giving them validation. And so they create the exact opposite of what they want. Some, with lots of insecurities, they're afraid to speak up at work, in groups where you're working together to accomplish a task, because there's a lot of fear that if I put myself out there and speak up, people might see my flaws and reject me. So I'll let others take the lead. And so what can happen in a dating situation, so take a girl that's got lots of insecurities, she doesn't want to go and say, let's do this on our date, let's do this. I'm going to set a boundary here. You're not allowed to do this to me. No, he might reject her if she makes too big of a stand. So I'll just let the guy lead and do whatever he wants, even if it means violating my own morals and values. And so you begin to do whatever it takes to fit in, even if it goes against who you are. And that is a sad thing. So you don't have good boundaries. You don't say no. You accommodate everybody. You people please. And you create really a very unhealthy relationship network because of that. And so what I hope you see is the net result of lots of insecurity that you don't deal with is that it feeds greater shame. I'm not good enough. It feeds more and more anxiety, and it really becomes a prison. It becomes a very debilitating thing. I don't want to put myself out there. I don't want to try anything. I don't want to set boundaries with people. I'll let them take advantage of me. And you create even more trauma for yourself. So it has nothing but negative results if we respond those ways. So before we get to the healing, let me give you some of the triggers that you might have today of your insecurities. So your insecurities are not always at a conscious level. They're not functioning in a way that is debilitating unless you get triggered. And once you get triggered, then you go into your fight-flight type of coping things that we just talked about. So what are the triggers? So anything that triggers your shame, that you're not good enough, that you're stupid, that you're a failure, anything that triggers shame will trigger insecurity. Anything that triggers abandonment, your fear of abandonment, they're going to reject me. They're going to say no to me. They don't want a relationship with me. All of that triggers insecurity. When you are feeling neglected by somebody that says they're committed to you, you go, why am I being neglected? It must be me. And that triggers your insecurity. When you go to see somebody and there's not a spark in their eye of excitement when they see you, if you got lots of insecurities, you can go, oh, that must be I'm not good enough. And it triggers your insecurity just because they didn't get really excited when they saw you coming. Or whenever you go to try something new for the first time, that will trigger insecurity. Or if you feel you've disappointed somebody you respect, by the way you've acted, by what you've done, that will trigger insecurity. If you make a mistake. And for many people in complex trauma, that means you didn't do something perfectly. That will trigger your insecurity. If you feel like you're a burden in the friendship you have with somebody, or that you're becoming a bit of an inconvenience to them, that will trigger insecurity. If you have a conflict with somebody, probably after the conflict is over, you're going to have a lot of insecurity. If you are in a new situation where you got to learn a whole bunch of new stuff and you don't learn it quickly enough in your mind, you will probably feel insecure. And if you don't do it perfectly the first attempt, you'll probably have your insecurity triggered. When you have to do something that you know you're naturally not really good at, that will trigger your insecurity. If you gain weight, if you get a new wrinkle on your face, that could trigger your insecurity. If you share with a friend or a group something you've never shared with anybody before, or if you express an emotion that you're expressing for the first time because you bottled it up for years, after you've shared that, you'll go home and go, oh my goodness, I can't face those people again. What do they think of me now? It's triggered your insecurity. If you are in a social setting and you're around somebody who's very confident, somebody who's very pretty, somebody who's very charming, that could trigger your insecurity. Or when you meet a new person and you like them and be interested in developing a friendship, that could trigger your insecurity. So what I hope you see is there's tons of things today that can trigger insecurity. And once your insecurity is triggered, it's triggering your limbic brain. And your limbic brain says, we have to go into fight or flight. We have to get out of here. And it wants to drag you back to all the old ways of dealing with insecurities. But what I want you to think about is what would be a healthy way to respond when I have an insecurity triggered. So let me start with this. What happens in complex trauma is there's parts of you that were accepted by your parents and parts of you that weren't accepted. Parts of your body, parts of your personality. And so you hated the things that weren't accepted by your parents and you accepted the things that they accepted. Now it's important to accept all of you. Stuff you can't change about your body, about your personality. There are parts of your body that maybe you could change. You could get braces. You could wear contact lens instead of glasses. Those are options for you. But there's a lot of stuff about your body that really, it's kind of the way it is. It's in your genetic makeup. And so it's those things I'm talking about that you need to learn to accept. Now, this is going to be difficult because you have an emotional reaction, not just a logical thought about those characteristics. So when you think of being introverted, you just don't have a bunch of things in your thinking about introversion. You have negative emotions about being introverted. And so you have to fight through both the lies in your thinking and the negative emotions and say, this is what I am. Now, let me give you an example just to help you know how to do this. Pretty well everybody that I work with who's an introvert hated being an introvert. They thought it was inferior to being an extrovert. I am an extreme introvert. Thankfully, my parents helped me to realize that introverts have strengths just like extroverts. One is not better than the other. Both bring great value to life. And so don't focus on what I would see as the weaknesses of being an introvert. Focus on the pluses that I bring to the world because I'm an introvert. And that was a helpful thing. So I will always be an introvert. That you can't change. But I don't have to, when I'm in a social setting and my introversion says, I want to go hide in a corner, I don't have to give in to that. That would be an unhealthy response. I can say, even though I'm an introvert, I can force myself to connect with people, force myself to meet new people. I don't have to be controlled in a negative way by my introversion. And so I need to learn to live with my introversion. I need to see it in a way that is a positive thing and that manages it in a healthy way. I have to take that further. I can't change my basic personality, But there are parts of me I need to change, and those are what we call character flaws. So if I am always procrastinating and it's getting me in trouble and causing conflict in the marriage and family, I can change procrastination problems. If I'm very critical and I don't validate my kids very well, I need to change that. That's not part of the personality, that's part of character. And so I need to be aware of the difference between personality and character, and I need to change the areas where my character is hurting others. Two other things that are necessary with insecurities to heal. Set boundaries with people who are always taking shots at you, teasing you, making fun of you. You don't need to be hanging around those kind of people, because that just keeps feeding the insecurities. But hang around people who accept you for who you are. People that validate your personality and who you are. As you do that, you will find your insecurities become less, and they don't get triggered as often. And when they do get triggered, you're able to work through it more quickly. So that's the end of part one. I hope that helps you as you think about your insecurities, and I hope it'll help you begin to grow in this area. We're going to take a 1-minute break, and then I'm going to come back for the Christian part. If you're not interested.
No, thank you.